always know you could feel beauty rising.
Hi, my name is Sue Skaski with Vermont Volunteer Services for Animals Humane Society, and welcome to our show, For the Animals. Today we're talking about an issue with regard to cows being kept in Bakersfield, Vermont, and it's an issue that has made headlines in the newspaper and on the television. And with me here today to discuss this is Adam Steinberg. Adam's been on the show before. He is the owner of Yoga to Go, and he is an animal activist for many years. Thank you for joining me, Adam.
Thank you, Sue. Thanks.
On the telephone we have Senator Harold Gaillard. He is a long-serving member of the Vermont legislature. He was co-chair of the Senate Agricultural Committee, who worked tirelessly to advocate for humane agricultural practices, and longtime dairy farmer in Addison County. Thank you, Senator, for being on with us today, and most especially for your years of service. And I've got to say, you gave attention to every piece of legislature. You never, ever played any political game, and your record speaks for itself. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you very much.
Okay. At one time, how many cows did you have as a farmer yourself?
Well, the total size of my herd, Sue, was the highest number was 348 head.
Whoa, that's a lot to care for. Can you tell?
Yes.
Can you describe a day in your life as a responsible farmer caring for that many animals?
Well, Sue, certainly it took a tremendous amount of planning and forethought to ensure that we had plenty of feed, not only just feed for our animals, but certainly high-quality feed. Then it took planning and financial planning to ensure that we had the right, not only high-quality feed, but also the grain and the minerals that are also required to have the animals not only maintain body condition, but certainly to grow as well. So it was a full-time effort of 3 full-time employees and 600 acres of land and several thousand tons of feed put up every year to ensure that my animals were well cared for and well fed.
Okay. What laws do we have in place now that would give the state attorneys the ability to prosecute these 2 men that that to this date have their cattle outside and have refused to give them any hay, any water, and any shelter?
That's totally and completely unacceptable, Sue, to somebody to treat animals like that. And I would guess that the standard for that would be very, very low due to the fact that that's animal cruelty. That's absolute animal cruelty, not feeding your animals correctly and so on. So I would think the standard would be quite low for that. Okay. And that it wouldn't take much on the part of a prosecutor, state's attorney to bring charges of animal cruelty against someone that was starving their animals and that under those circumstances. It's totally unacceptable, and the people of the state of Vermont have a very low tolerance for animal cruelty.
Well,
and it doesn't have to be physical not providing water, not providing enough feed, is certainly falls within the definition of cruelty to animals.
One of the cows that they came upon that day when they were there, because the state police attended, someone from the Agency of Agriculture, the constable and a veterinarian, found one of the cows with hypothermia, which had to be destroyed right there. And a lot of the cows are reportedly very skinny, and this is just going into the winter now.
I'm surprised that action hasn't been taken, but there's two definitions of cruelty, Sue, that the Agency of Agriculture certainly seems to operate on. Number one is the condition and the body condition of the animals. If they appear to be well fed, usually the Agency of Agriculture, at least from my experience, says, okay, the conditions under which they live are not very good, but at least they're well fed. But it would seem to me, Sue, if you've got conditions where the animals are exposed to the elements, are underfed, and their ribs are showing, which would indicate a lack of nutrition, it would seem to me the state police and the state's attorney and the Agency of Agriculture would be jumping on this quite rapidly. I'm surprised they're not.
Well, it's been close to 2 weeks, but we hope that with this show and the pressure that the public should be putting on the state attorney to bring this.
I think if the public knew about the conditions under which those animals were living, Sue, the public would be outraged. Again, in my experience of 8 years in the state Senate, the people of the state of Vermont have a very, very low tolerance for animal abuse. Very low tolerance.
And thanks to you and some other wonderful legislators, we do have some very, very good good statutes on the books. We just need law enforcement to take care of it.
Well, I hope that we can get that, Sue, and I hope that the law enforcement will step up to the plate, and despite the fact they may be busy dealing with human issues, they'll step up to the plate and get the attention of the gentlemen that own the individuals that own that farm and put those animals either A, out of there, or B, moved, or certainly get the feed that's required to allow them to survive in the cold weather.
Exactly. Well, we might have to call on you for your help, but I thank you very, very much for taking time today, and I know that you're at the State House, and I wish you well, and I hope we're in touch soon.
Sue, I really appreciate you thinking of me, and it's been an honor, and I really appreciate this, and say hello, if you would, to those that I worked with in the legislature. I've always enjoyed our visits, and I commend you for the work you're doing, and I ask you to continue to do what you're doing, Sue, for the animals.
It's a group effort, and we couldn't have done it without you. Thank you so very much, and we'll be in touch.
All right, thank you, Sue. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Yep, bye.
So I was wondering what role the agency plays in this case and other similar situations.
Okay. Do you mind if I ask who you're with, or on whose behalf are you calling?
I'm calling on behalf of For the Animals, a show out of White River Junction.
Sorry, a what out of White River Junction?
A television show.
Oh, television show. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So in instances involving livestock, alleged animal welfare violations, the Agency of Agriculture is required to be consulted prior to the humane agent or law enforcement officer bringing any enforcement action against the owner or manager of the livestock animal.
Okay. Do you know if you've been consulted yet about this case?
We have been, yes.
And where does that stand?
They've consulted with or asked for feedback from our animal health program coordinator that covers that territory.
My understanding is that the veterinarian on scene determined that the cows lacked food, water, and adequate shelter. Do you know if the state or your department, do you know if anybody addressed those issues? know this case has been ongoing since December, so it's been a couple of weeks, and I spoke to the constable who was originally there back in December, and he'd been up there a few times. At no point had he ever seen any hay or water. Oh, excuse me, at one point there was 2 bales of hay to feed 38 cows. So there's no water or hay. How would action be taken, and who would enforce that?
Again, that action would be taken by the humane agent, and they would be the ones responsible for enforcing that.
So in this particular case, how would I get that name? Is it State Trooper Anderson? Is it the
That's my, yes, that's my understanding. He would qualify as a humane agent.
So at this point, does your agency know what shape the cows are in?
I don't think anybody from our agency has been there since the one visit that was made at the request of Trooper Anderson. So no, I have not been informed of the current status of those cattle.
So,
I've not been provided an update by the police on this case.
so if somebody were interested in seeing these cows healthy, fed, and watered, what would they do?
To make that happen,
Yeah, I guess it would be illegal to trespass on someone else's land and feed their animals because they're not being fed or watered now. I mean, one's already been euthanized because of hypothermia. So it seemed like it's a pretty blatant animal cruelty case, and I'm quite unclear as to why it's taken 2 weeks to get food or water to starving and freezing animals.
and again, that would be a question for the police.
So
I can't answer that on their behalf.
So it seems that your agency really doesn't have much to do with the welfare of animals. Is that true?
Again, our authority as defined in statute is that we may provide consultation to the humane agents at their request, and that is mandatory prior to the time that any enforcement action is taken against an individual. That is the scope of our authority.
Could you tell me from past experience, is this a normal time for the police to file paperwork, 2 weeks in animal cruelty cases?
Again, that would be a question for the police. I can't accurately answer what their normal averages are, or what the statistics have been related to that. I'm not privy to that information.
Maybe you can help me, because it appears that the police are generally wrapped up in human affairs. They don't seem to have a whole lot of experience with animals. What agency would be responsible for ensuring that the cruelty is not continued?
It would be anybody who is defined as a humane agent.
Back to the state trooper.
Yep, it could be the state trooper, it could be the constable, it could be an employee or agent of the Humane Society, it actually could be a deputy game warden, it could be any officer authorized to serve criminal process. There's a list in the statute of what categories of individuals qualify as humane agents or humane officers, and so any of those individuals has the legal authority in statute to carry through with the things that you're describing.
I did speak with the constable yesterday, and
Okay.
I'm not exactly where it came from, but he did say that it was not his responsibility to feed someone else's cows.
Okay, I haven't talked to him myself, so I can't comment on
I'm pretty sure that was different than the state trooper. I have not spoken to State Trooper Anderson. I believe this is a town or more local constable.
constable. Okay.
But he didn't want to pay for the hay because he felt it was the owner's responsibility. But the owner is obviously not willing to pay for hay because he feels the cows can dig 3 feet through the snow to get to their food.
Yes, that's what I saw in the article that was printed in the, was it in the Free Press or 7 Days?
Yeah.
Or maybe it was on WCAX, actually. That's where I saw it on the internet, on their site.
So
yeah, and that's how it was described.
it's quite apparent the owners have no intention of feeding or watering their cows. What would your recommendation for someone that cares about animals, what would you suggest they do? I own 2 dogs, and I would never dream of telling someone that I don't have money this month, so I'm not feeding my dogs. That just is completely outlandish to me.
Yep, agreed. Me too.
So what would you recommend? They're not my cows, but I still feel compassion for all beings, and I find it difficult to deal with this situation. So what would be the next step?
Well, the individuals are limited, as you pointed out already, by, other laws that apply, trespassing, etc. So I would express, if I had concerns, I would express them to the humane agent or the law enforcement officer that is handling the case, and make my concerns known to those individuals.
And continue calling the newspapers. Okay. Very good. Thank you for your time, Dr. Haas.
All right, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Dr. Lynn Morrell is a retired veterinarian from South Woodstock, and the name of your practice was Kedron
Valley Veterinary Clinic.
For how many years?
Was here for 35 years. Well, including the fact that it's been gone for 2 years, maybe 33 years.
Okay, but you're still busy.
Oh, yeah.
You're always busy.
Right.
But in that time, you worked on livestock, cats, dogs, you name it, and you did it.
First 2 years, I worked nearly exclusively with cattle.
Okay, and that's what I wanted to talk with you about today with regard to the cattle being kept at the Bakersfield farm and with the keeping of the cattle out in the snow with no shelter available to them, no hay being provided, no water being provided. Could you talk to me about that as a veterinarian with everything you know and what you've researched?
Well, I was a little curious about the snow thing because around here generally we don't consider snow as an adequate source of water. So I went online and checked into some research out west where it's a bigger issue. And it turns out that most cows can probably survive with snow only for water under certain conditions. The snow has to be fresh and powdery because they actually lick it with their tongues, they flick it into their mouth. So if you have a thaw and it refreezes, or if it rains in the snow, they can't get enough from it.
And we had a warm spell last week.
Yes, we had, and things would have been crusted over, and cows really have a tough time getting enough snow. They won't bite frozen snow.
Mm-hmm.
They flick it up with their tongues. But even then, out west, and all the research that was done out there, they said you still have to have water available. You have to have thawed water available because I think like 2% of cows would not go over and get water, but virtually every cow will supplement what they get from the snow with water. And it can reduce the amount of water that they need by maybe 50%. But none of the research that's been done suggested that you can just turn cows out on snow.
Now, we were talking earlier about cows and the quantity that they needed of water per day, summer versus winter, and the reasons why.
Well, in the case of a non-lactating dairy cow or a beef cow, say a 1,100-pound cow, 6 or 8 gallons of water a day is all they need. If it's snow, it's 25 or 30 or 40 pounds of snow. And this will vary upward, of course. In a lactating dairy cow, it can be 4 times that much. But the amount of water determines their ability to digest, because the rumen, where they're digesting is got to have a certain moisture content. If they don't get enough water, then their feed consumption will drop, If their feed consumption drops, then their condition drops, the amount of energy they're producing drops, or eventually and ultimately their body temperature will drop.
Sure,
And one of the cows up there was hypothermic, and that cow probably either didn't learn to drink water by eating snow, and by the way, that's a learned behavior. It's not natural, and it takes cows several days. So if you had cows out grazing in the fall and then came a first snowstorm, you couldn't count on all those cows adapting to eating snow right away. If there were some old timers there, they would remember how to do it from previous seasons, and the others would watch them and eventually learn. But you'd have a little dangerous period there if you didn't have water available.
And how about,
like I said, you got to have the water anyway. You
sure.
just
How about the hay?
Hay is probably a little more definite situation. The amount of grass that would survive under snow and still be digestible is not that great. If you had a very lush alfalfa pasture and you had only light fluffy snow, yeah, they could probably get a fair amount. But again, very few cows, given the choice, will turn down supplemental feed, for what they can go and get on their own. So if you put on the double stress of having to eat snow for water and having to dig for every blade of grass, then you're really putting these cows under a lot of stress. And some of them are going to get behind the curve. Their body temps are going to start to drop from lack of energy, and then it's a downhill thing very quickly.
You had mentioned earlier when we were talking how many pounds they needed a day.
Of hay, it's 30 or 40 pounds.
Wow.
Well, 25 to 40, depends on the weight of the cow.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it depends. And if it's a heifer with a calf, a cow with a calf, then that's even more because she's producing, energy for that calf, and she needs more water as well. And the other thing is that you need to provide that hay in a way that it's not wasted. If you just go out and break open bales on the ground, cows are going to scatter it everywhere, and then they're going to lay down on it and use it for bedding.
Mm-hmm.
And the requirement for hay can go up by 25 to 40%, depending on whether you provide it in a proper way. You need a rack or something that holds that hay in one place, and then the cows will use it fairly efficiently. And even then, most farmers will move that rack because it'll get pounded down and muddy around it. They'll move it to a fresh spot so that they can clean up their own waste. Once it's tromped down and there's manure on the ground around the hay, then of course they're not going to clean up their own waste.
And you mentioned that the animals had to be watched too, individually, for their body condition.
That was one of the big things out of the Extension Service research done out west, was that if you start compromising by mainly by using snow for water, that you have to monitor these cows very carefully. And any cow that is a body condition score of 4 or less should not be put on hay. Should not be allowed to have snow as a sole source of water, because they just won't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And the same would apply to hay. If they only can get what they can get by pawing through the snow, they're not going to get the energy they need. So they've got to be in condition, and you've got to be checking them every day to make sure they stay in condition, because the cow can go down pretty fast. If that rumen quits functioning or becomes inefficient, then they go down really fast.
And I remember you helping with the statutes when we were working on these back 10 years ago. And in your opinion, does this, in the manner that these animals are being kept, does this meet the requirement of the law?
No, I think it misses in several respects, both from feed, and from water, and from shelter. My understanding, there was no shelter provided.
Right.
And if you don't have shelter, then under windy conditions, cows' feed requirements even go up more than what we talked about.
And last night we had minus 20 up
Yeah,
there, and that
yeah.
was without the wind factor.
Yeah, and if you add wind into that, the cows can handle the cold if they have a shelter from the wind, and if they're getting enough energy.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, that rumen is generating a lot of heat, and that keeps them warm. But anything that keeps that second stomach from working is going to get them in trouble. And if you add enough stresses, low temperature, not enough water, not enough feed, then they're going to get in trouble.
Well,
And one other thing they mentioned, and I don't think that was being provided here, is that they need some kind of mineral vitamin supplement. Just free choice. It can be block or it can be powder, but it needs to be something which they have access to, because generally speaking, the quality of the forage is probably not going to be as great in the winter as it would be out in pasture in the spring.
Well, I'm surprised that the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, that prides themselves, the seal of quality in Vermont, has not come out spoken more harshly on this. I do know that they were instructed to provide hay that day, but whether that has continued or not, we don't know. And calls to the state's attorney, Jim Hughes, have gone unanswered.
Well, it's an economic issue with anyone in agriculture, and we recognize that. But I think you have to make your plan in the fall, in a case like this. Is this going to be an economical enterprise for me? Can I take these cows out there? Can I provide them melted water? And can I provide them with supplemental hay and still make a profit? If not, then you should be doing something else. And that's it's an economic thing. But you can't deprive the animals of what they need to survive and to thrive, because that doesn't pay either. If your animals don't thrive, you don't have healthy animals in the spring to market.
Well, they're down one already.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing I wanted to ask you, we talked briefly about parasitism.
Yes, parasitism, right.
And any diseases that the animals might have. Could you talk briefly about that?
Well, we talked about all these different stressors, inadequate water, inadequate feed, and inadequate shelter. If you had parasitism, in other words, the cows had stomach worms, this will be another stressor which just makes it that much harder for the cow to survive or even to thrive. It also makes them more vulnerable to disease. And if a cow's in a weakened condition and a virus happens to get in there, that can happen pretty easily. The owners could inadvertently bring in a bacteria or a virus, and they get diarrhea, for instance, under a stressful circumstance like that. You could lose the whole batch very quickly.
Is that, now educate me, is that like E. coli, mad cow, or
Well,
what?
it would be like E. coli, that way, but there are a lot of viruses as well, and there are some viruses that cause respiratory disease. And under this kind of stress, if a cow got a respiratory virus, she'd be less likely to survive.
Now, in this food chain, from what I understand, one of the two men own a store where they sell the meat. Do you know if the meat's inspected ahead of time or how that happens?
I suspect the Department of Agriculture is allowed to inspect, but I don't know that it's done as a matter of policy. I really can't comment. I don't know.
Okay, that would be very...
Normally cattle are inspected at slaughter at a licensed slaughterhouse. I don't know in case of private slaughter what the rules are.
Uh-huh. Okay.
But you take enough things away from a cow. They're a finely tuned animal, and they're bred to be very efficient. But you've got to treat them just right, or they go downhill very fast.
And the word humane pops into my mind.
Exactly.
Is that not what we're all supposed to be here for?
Right.
So, thank you very much. I really appreciate, as always, your opinion and your expertise in so many subjects.
Well, thank you very much for asking.
At dusk, there came a turning. There was a moment when all was known. You could feel beauty rising on the breeze, the shapes, the stone.